of AR and VR work that's happening now that I think is really exciting. And in my own work, I'm always very interested in the juxtapositions between real life and virtual life. And so I like the idea of creating these things virtually. I first started playing around with 3D modeling in Second Life, which always seems to come up.
I don't remember. It's coming back.
It's coming back. You know, I really like it. And I think a lot of the artwork that's dealing with environmental issues that's in these virtual worlds and where they're using 3D modeling and playing with simulations, I think can be really critical. So that was one of the reasons. And also it's just cool.
Okay. Yeah, that was my second question. What art have you turned to this year at this time? So you were already kind of answering that. Any particular artists or projects in particular that you turned to this year?
That I've been looking at? Yes. And now I wish I had this question because I have so much trouble with remembering names, but I will start with this artist that I actually just noticed yesterday that I can't believe I wasn't aware of, named Alice Bucknell. I don't know if anybody out there has heard of her. And she's 28 years old. She's originally from Sarasota, Florida, and she's living in London now. And she writes for a lot of hip art magazines, and she's been doing this thing called this series of videos that look at like neoliberal utopias and the blockchain. And she calls it, now I'm going to forget, it's crypto, gosh, I can't even remember, but she's been part of the discussions on NFTs, right? The non-fungible tokens and all of this crypto art. And so she just creates these really amazing videos that I don't understand how she makes all of these videos and writes all of these critical essays. She must stay up all night and has all this energy, and she's done everything in such a short amount of time. So the isolation has really done her well. But really fascinating work that looks at, really intersects with, these new virtual economies and the blockchain and new technologies and these neoliberal paradises. And I just recall this book that I read several years ago by Mike Davis that, I keep forgetting everything. It's called, here, let me look again. Evil Paradises, Dream Worlds of Neoliberalism, that came out like in 2008. And he really talks about, the issues of extraction in building these utopian gated communities. And so I feel like her work really deals with a lot of that. So she's somebody who's interesting. Another artist who does interesting work that I was in a show with several years ago is Jacob. I'm gonna have to look up the name again. So if you want to keep asking me questions while I look up his name, I can.
That's okay. I was going to ask you, since error is also part of it, I was just thinking about all the glitches that happen, right? It's not at this point in time. Another question that New York Times had, which, I think it's also important. Did you have any particularly bad ideas this year?
Did I have any
particularly bad ideas?
Well, I don't understand. Here, I found his name. I'm just going to put it. Should I put it in the chat? It's Jacob Stenson. JAKOB-STEENSEN. And he does really interesting 3D modeling and creating with AR and VR these sort of environmental critiques and sort of simulating a lot of kind of remote destinations that we're in fear of losing. So
you mean like remote ecologies, or?
Well, he's been getting a lot of visibility, which has enabled him to sort of travel all over the world to a lot of these paradises. And he's extremely technically proficient, and he does a lot of 3D scans and recreates these environments, and does his own sound, and collaborates with other sound artists, and really creates these really beautiful, immersive, but simulated experiences of, yeah, areas where we're running into issues of extinction. Yeah, I think he's somebody interesting to follow.
Oh, nice. So any particularly bad ideas?
Bad idea of other, what other people are doing out there?
No, for, well, other people or you?
Me? Oh, bad ideas. I mean, yeah, there's tons of bad ideas.
Disclaimer, this is the New York Times questionnaire.
Let's see, bad ideas.
The last year, you don't have to answer. Okay, I can ask
I'll come back to that.
Okay, I can ask the next one. What's a moment for this year that you always will remember? That was their fourth question.
Their fourth question. I mean, I think, I mean, there's a lot of moments. I mean, definitely the first thing that comes to mind because of the hearing that's going on is the George Floyd murder and the, you know, the massive protests, BLM protests. That definitely does. And of course, the word COVIDiots that, you know, kind of keep that. I think that's something, but definitely the protests and like images and video of New York City right when the pandemic hit. And yeah, I think I think it was it the New York Times that did people looking out their windows in that photo series of everybody showing what they could see outside their window.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have one more from them. Was there a particular friendship that sustained you artistically?
Well, in the beginning, and we haven't been doing as much, I will say it was more of a collective friendship that I'm part of this consortium of self-identified women in art and science and technology called FEM Meeting. I think I mentioned that at the other discussion. And they were supposed to have, we were supposed to have a kind of a meetup conference in the US, which I was very excited about because it's usually in Europe because it's an international consortium of people. And it obviously didn't happen. And this was right when everything hit and got bad, March, April. So we ended up having a series of teapot chats every Wednesday morning. And it was just really wonderful to be able to log on and just chat. You know, it was very informal and it was a bunch of people all over the world. You know, there was always the regulars and then other people would pop in. And I think that really kind of helped with maintain the creativity. Yeah, it was hard, depressing time for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we should move to your work and talk a little bit about what you've been doing. And I think you're still working on this, the new work that deals actually with ecology and well, not only ecology, but also you have a speculative work that's called aphrodisiac in the machine, but then you've been doing work with all kinds of biological materials as well, including soil, microbes, and so on. You have something that is quite interesting also, this notion of non-human labor that I think you're also referencing in these works. So new patterns of consumption and so on. So that'll be great if maybe we can, you know, you can share that with audience a little bit. And I know that is also a project of aphrodisiac in the machine. If I understand it correctly, it's still, you know, in process, right?
Yeah.
So.
Sure. I could talk about the one that the non-human labor, and
Hmm.
should I jump to the presentation?
Sure,
I
go
have a
ahead.
presentation that I already had together that it just makes it easier to show some of the work. So okay, I'm going to jump to a different screen then, because I was gonna, do you want me just to jump to the proof of soil one and
Sure.
skip the other
Yeah.
plants? And we can just jump around. Okay. Um, okay. So let's see if this is going to work again. Ah, okay, is that working? You see it?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. All right. So I became really interested, as Claudia was talking about, in the issue of non-human labor, because most of my earlier work was really looking at digital labor. And I think where Claudia and I intersect is the gamification of
Yes.
everything. And that also got me really interested in virtual economies. And that's also how I fell into Second Life, and was very interested in that virtual world, and that it had its own currency called the Linden. So proof of soil is kind of a play on proof of work. And references the blockchain. And the way that the blockchain happens is through what is known as proof of work. So all of the computers that are processing, and here, I'll just go to this next. Oops, that's not letting me. All the computers that are processing on the blockchain to create virtual currency use an incredible amount of energy, which you've probably heard about now because it's really become popularized in the media, especially with all the crypto art. And so kind of this interest in labor and thinking more about what really is non-human labor. And one of my colleagues just did this interesting piece called Labor, where he looked at production and manufacturing, and that it wasn't human workers who were doing the work anymore, but it was different kinds of bacteria. And all of these bacteria are being designed and actually forming labor. And this is just a graphic, right, that shows the incredible amount of energy that actually is used on the blockchain. And you see where Bitcoin is in there with like Norway and Argentina. Of course, it's not as much as the US, but it's pretty high. And this is in terawatts. And they say that Bitcoin uses, let's see, is around 120 terawatts. This is an incredible amount. So just wanted to show, I had thrown this into where you can see this is just watts. So we're going from watts to kilowatts to terawatts. So if we're looking at over 100 terawatts, that's a lot of energy, right? And then I threw this in here for you, Claudia, right? Of course, I like how they new gaming consoles. These aren't the new ones, but they had even older ones. So anyways, this project Proof of Soil looks at the labor of microbes within the context of producing energy. And so it looks at microbial fuel cells. And there's certain bacteria, which such as Geobacter, that are able to, when they metabolize toxins in soil. So when they're actually bioremediating soil, they produce electricity, and that electricity can be captured and produce energy. And so microbial fuel cells are something that have been around for a while, and they continue to innovate to expand their ability to capture more energy. For now, they're able to really produce light and have been used in parks and kind of things that aren't as critical for energy. But what I did with this is I have this map just showing in Chicago. I was in this show that was about labor, and I wanted to look at the amount of energy that blockchain mining data processing centers in Chicago were using. And that's all of these red dots, but then all of the brown dots are brownfield sites in Chicago, being an industrial city. And a lot of times where blockchain mining happens, they take over former older industrial warehouses and factories because they're near electrical grids. And usually those are where you find a lot of brownfields. So if I kind of zoom in a little closer, you can see there was about 34,000 acres of brownfields in the greater Chicago area. And Chicago is also the third largest data processing center in the US. And they process lots of other data, but there's a lot of blockchain mining that's going on. And what I probably didn't finish saying is it takes many computers to do this proof of work, because they're solving these puzzles, which have become more and more complex, in order for somebody to actually solve the puzzle and add to the block and get that token, right? So what the proof of soil does, it's kind of the speculative design that envisions taking all that toxic soil and actually putting microbial fuel cells there, and how much energy could you really generate to offset the energy being used by all the data processing centers. So if I zoom in, let's see. So here you can kind of see, right, 0.005 kilowatts is a credit card transaction, going up to 431 kilowatts for one Bitcoin transaction. So a huge difference in energy usage. So I hope that makes sense. And then, I kind of started drawing up some different prototypes of, well, how would I communicate this idea? And one is definitely right through the diagram. But I ended up creating this installation in this exhibition at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago that was called Reworking Labor. And I made a plot of like a brown field with what you would have weeds in it and a fuel cell. And let me just jump to that. And in the fuel cell, you could see, how much that piece of land could generate. So it could generate 5 watts, which would charge, let's say, a router. The old iPhone power adapters are 5 watts. And here you can see, the way that a fuel cell, you could create it is actually pretty, it's fairly simple by sandwiching the microbes between pieces of carbon. And if you saw in the diagram, there's metal, an anode and a cathode, and that creates almost like a film within there that captures, harnesses the energy that they produce. And in terms of thinking also about the labor, let's see if this is going to play and if you can see it. So they're not going to play. I can't get them to play simultaneously without it being in presentation mode. But here on the 2 screens, you can see that there is a simulation of the geobacter microbes metabolizing the toxins in the soil and bioremediating, and they're doing the labor. And then simultaneously on this screen is, this is showing a visualization through dots of, it's actually Ethereum, it wasn't blockchain, of mining happening in real time. So it was scraping data from Ethereum being produced. So you're looking at the artificial intelligence labor of the computer in relation to the more embodied physical labor of the non-human, right, of the microbes. So they're both these kind of non-human forms of labor. Yeah, so that was proof of soil, and happy to elaborate a little further. And this one, I'm still developing and thinking more about different ways to present this and to innovate on it as well.
You had a reversal of fortune as well. I don't know if you have images for that, but I think it's interesting perhaps to talk about as kind of an earlier I think, work in relationship to that, and also in relationship to something very concrete, right? The
Mhm.
Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I have them all in here. So I could go.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, it's always, so this is why I usually always do a presentation and I lay it all out because, you know, I feel like my work is very research based, and there's a lot of, I'm really interested in data and how data is visualized. And this, the gardens that Claudia is talking about, um, was the first time using plants as a way to create more of a sentience to data visualizations, right? And these
Mhm.
visualizations are supposed to, you know, represent human material conditions, but they're often very void of any real humanity, right, within their abstraction. So what if we use plants as data points? And so I created this, let's see, where's these two different garden pieces, and it was called Reversal of Fortune. And I started looking at crowdfunding, and I was very, this kind of came out of my interest in earlier works that was about labor and crowdsourcing and being able to outsource labor digitally. And this was kind of the next phenomena, right? The crowdfunding, and everybody was so excited about all these new tech startups or creative cultural project funding right through Kickstarter, but there wasn't as much awareness on the way that it was really changing philanthropy. And this was back in 2015. And so this reversal of fortune, this first garden of virtual kinship, looked at the website Kiva. And Kiva, you know, only intends to do good things by creating like a front door to people in economically challenged countries that are looking for finance, right, for microfinancing. And, but a lot of these people, if you're familiar with microfinance, didn't have a lot of literacy around you know, banking systems, of what debt really means, and they would go into incredible debt. And in India, there was a huge issue right in the microfinance industry in the early 2000s. A lot of Indian farmers were committing suicide because they had gone completely bankrupt. So anyways, you know, Kiva, if you're not familiar with it, it works very similar to you know, a Kickstarter campaign where people in more affluent countries in the West could lend, as the rhetoric went, you could lend, you weren't really giving, you were lending these people a little bit of money, which helped, you know, with their survival. It was about their livelihood. But when you read the fine print, you would see that they were paying 50 to 60% in interest rates and fees. So a lot of this microfinance banking system was actually very, very corrupt. And so I wanted to make that more visible. And let's see if you could see this animation. This shows supposedly in real time on Kiva's website, people donating. And so you see these, you know, trajectories, and they're all moving from Western countries to, you know, the global South. And the other thing that was interesting, right, is the Kiva logo has a plant in it. And so there was this really amazing piece created in the 1990s by Ken Goldberg called The Telegarden. And it was a groundbreaking piece. He's an artist engineer out at Berkeley. And it was, you know, kind of foreshadowing both crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, because everybody can go online in this really awesome 90s interface and help nurture this garden, right? This robotic garden. So I wanted to take that a step further. And so here I have this global map, and it has 650 containers of soil and seed. And I had to test out a lot of different plants that would work in that tiny space. And then you have these two tanks, and one is kind of the starting tank of money lended for microfinance loans. And on the other side is where all the interest goes. So kind of playing with the metaphor of money like liquid capital. And I'll just show you the video that kind of explains it more. Let me know if you can see it. And this was at ZKM, which is a big media center in southern Germany that Peter Weibel started, who actually went to University of Buffalo.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah. So it's a giant CNC machine, and when the transactions on Kiva are happening in real time, it translates them to this garden. So when somebody gives money, I'll take this. When somebody donates money on the website or lends money, it actually tracks who the micro borrower, where they're located, and it gives a few drops of water to that pot of soil.
So what ended up happening to the plants? Did they actually survive, most of them, or?
Most of them did in this version.
I always ask myself that about Pellet Garden, right? Nobody ever talked about that, what happened to the plants, but.
Yeah, I think it worked, and he kind of continues. He has a new version of that, and I finally got to meet him because we invited him to Buffalo, so that was very exciting. And he liked this project. So here you can see this. Basically, most of the water though is going to this tank. And then I did another piece, which I can show in the series, that is a little bit more humorous, and it was called Planthropy. And so when I started looking at, well, why do people donate? You get responses like very typical, right? Because giving to others is good. Maybe a little bit of the ulterior motives, right? I'm helping people, but I'm also getting a tax credit. And then you have more idiosyncratic responses, such as because helping people is just plain sexy. So I was kind of like looking around Kiva, and then I started thinking more about Twitter and the issue of reputation economy and this armchair philanthropy, right? Of, oh, I just did this and everybody like it. And so Planthropy works on the same premise as Garden of Virtual Kinship, but it's these individual planters. And each of the planters responds to Twitter hashtags. So each one of the plants represents like a major cause, such as breast cancer, climate change, refugees. And I'll just play this so that you can get a sense of it. It's only a few minutes.
I donate because my heart is breaking and I want to help.
I donate because 1 in 4 children in poor country are Hungary.
I donate because cancer is so last year, and I'm a survivor today.
I donate because 5% of every t-shirt sold goes to the cause.
I donate to climate change because Leonardo DiCaprio does. I defend animal rights, but against gay marriage.
I donate because giving is sexy.
I donate because the dead boy on the beach was a message from God.
I donate because what if it was you?
So I think you kind of get the gist of it, that you could either tweet while you're there in the space, but it was also scraping for tweets with that hashtag. So it would kind of create this cacophony of sound and almost a sonic visualization of when people were actually donating or active on those different cause-related sites.
Yeah, so nice. Thank you for sharing. Maybe we can conclude with the oysters.
Sure.
The aphrodisiac, since they're, I think it's a bit fun and sexy, like you said.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just walk you through. I have a 4-minute kind of trailer, but I could maybe walk through some of the images that just kind of explain a little bit more what I'm doing. Does that sound good? Just
Sure.
for 4 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
So so I had a and I'll just kind of play this for a second because this is sort of the warm up to it. So I had a fellowship at Bowdoin College, and it gave me an opportunity to work with marine scientists. And I just ended up, I had a studio and I had some tanks of different things, and I decided to put some oysters in it. And I started to learn so much about these magical creatures, and also about the kind of myth of their ability to enhance one's libido, right? And started looking at the history of that from, Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, and the woman actually, let's say we're focusing more on bivalve mollusks, because this is a clamshell, or I don't know if people remember Casanova, who was the 18th century Italian adventurer, who now would be considered a womanizer. But in his memoirs, he wrote about that every morning he ate 50 oysters for breakfast, and that really gave him this incredible libido. But the more I researched it, I found out that that oysters and other bivalve mollusks, though, produce a large amount of what is known a non-essential amino acid known as D-aspartic. And that is actually has been used for bodybuilding, because it does really affect the sexual hormones, estrogen and progestin. But they still don't really know, does it actually enhance sexuality? So I wanted to kind of play on that, but also talk about how oysters are these incredible, sustainable organisms. Like if you look at this picture here of, kind of dirty water, within 1 hour, this small tank of oysters completely filtered that water. And so a little 2-inch oyster can filter up to 50 gallons a day. So that like beats the heck out of those Berkey filters, right, that you have at home. And also their seashells are natural seawalls against sea level rising. And then I also started looking at this new industry of sea-based farming and aquaculture, and the incredible technology around that. And how sci-fi it could actually get. This is this is aquaculture in part of a big company in Norway, and you could just see the technology and the play with biometrics. So I'll just talk and then I'll jump to the thing. So basically the project is an environmental science fiction that plays on the myth of the oyster as a way to cure climate change. And it's about that these bioengineered oysters are secreting this juice that can change aphrodisia into what is known as aquadesia. And if you just drink the water, it will affect humans. And that might create this other sentience, a sentience 2.0. So I know we're running out of time, so I'll just play this.
Do you want to cure climate change, but can't find the right solution? That's because you've been looking out there when the solution is right here. It's called aquadesia, a new awakened state of multi-species entanglement, bringing humans back into nature, all by simply drinking a glass of water per day. Want to know more? The key to aquadesia is the Mollusca ostradi, more commonly known as the oyster. This magical creature can filter up to 50 gallons of water per day. Its shells of calcium carbonate can be used to create protective seawalls. It is rich in protein and has been a vital food source for thousands of years. But one untapped resource is finally being put to use. When consumed, the organism activates what is known as aphrodisia in humans and possibly other species. In aphrodisia, a libidinal and erotic body-mind awakeness occurs. This is caused by a special amino acid known as D-aspartate found in the Mollusca ostradi. Scientists are now discovering that D-aspartate is capable of an even broader range of transformations in the body. Aquadesia harnesses the power of aphrodisia to create a new energetic ecosystem that extends beyond the boundaries of the human body to one that more fluidly engages both inside and outside. A new breed of the Mollusca ostradi has been bioengineered that is able to transform D-aspartate into a powerful liquid formula. When ingested, it will enable humans and possibly other species to experience aquadesia. In special networked aquaculture farms located around the world, the bioengineered Mollusca ostradi are being harvested. The system allows for precise control of the fluid's molecular composition and the exact amount of fluid dispensed. The farms are being strategically positioned near municipal water sources. This enables streamlining of the fluid into special public drinking water reservoirs for ease of distribution. Access to your faucet is as easy as flipping a switch. Now everyone can experience aquadesia. Want to connect?
Great, thanks for sharing. Aquadesia. Okay, so it's quite fun. I would like to open for questions now from the audience and remind everybody that we would like you to turn on the camera so we can see your face. And so please go ahead, it's open for you. And if you have any questions about aquadesia or other products, please go ahead. Colleen?
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
So Stephanie, you talked a little bit about your interest in your previous work with virtual worlds like Second Life. And so I'm just curious, do you still work with Second Life, or have you moved on to newer virtual worlds that might incorporate new technologies like VR or other things?
Good question. I did move on from Second Life because I actually became known as the Second Life lady. And anytime anybody saw me, they'd be like, "Oh, Second Life." I'm like, "I'm not in Second Life anymore." I did move on from it, and I did a little bit with AR, but I haven't really gotten into the VR thing, and I guess that's a little surprising. I think it was when I started getting interested in working with plants, with the gardens, and really wanting to make more physical, robotic, interactive pieces. And that kind of took me away from it. But I think actually from the pandemic and being online so much now, that I've kind of turned more to getting back into virtual environments. And I think that's also part of my interest in Blender. But I kind of can't seem to get that invested in Mozilla Hubs. I just feel like it isn't as elegant as Second Life was. I know that there's better things about it, but and I know there's some other formats, but I don't know, I don't find them as fulfilling or satisfying for some reason. Do you? Have you, what do you like working with?
Have you heard of VR chat? I've used that in the past because you don't even need a virtual reality headset, and it's kind of similar to Second Life in that you can basically like build any environment to interact with. So maybe you could look into that.
Yeah, I think it's also having to put the headset on, and I was fortunate to be able to travel a lot. I was on a sabbatical before in 2019. I got lucky and I pretty much was on the road, and I spent a lot of time in Japan. And so I kept trying every VR that I could, while I was there. And I don't know, it just didn't really do it for me that much. But I'll check out what you're talking about.
Yeah, some of my students are going on and on about VR, and now it's the future. I don't get it either, what they are seeing. So there was a question about, Stephanie, about how you got interested in these questions in terms of economies and issues of labor and digital technologies. What is in your background that makes you focus on this?
Well, initially I was very interested in technology-based art, and that might have I spent a lot of time in New York City, and I spent a lot of time like right in the middle of the whole .com period, and that probably brought in the interest in economics. And I've always been really interested in issues of labor. And so it was kind of timely that the whole conflation of leisure and labor and what we know as like labor and gamification just started happening. And I was just kind of right there. And I think that that relation, I've always been really interested in the relationship between how our physical actions can affect can affect the virtual, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the early pieces was taking an Atari game such as like Dig Dug and looking at the computer video game industry and recreating those games, recontextualizing them so that and with almost like an iToy motion, early motion tracking interface, so that people had to actually be physical and work up a sweat in order to get points virtually. But they were actually doing these incredibly challenging physical labor jobs, like digging for coltan, which was actually the Dig Dug game, or beer tapper, where you have like the bartender on the assembly line, and that became computer chip manufacturing and that you would see in China. And I also spent a lot of time in China. So I think that was big about the looking at the labor.
Nice. There's a question as well about this this focus on labor and feminism. So in your work, so one of the things that I can see, and is probably more visible now, I think, with your ecological practices, the notion of care is really at the forefront, and this notion of non-human labor is very connected to that. So perhaps could you speak a little bit or expand a little bit more on that?
Sure. I think with the early forms of labor, I have never really focused as much on women's work. I kind of looked more at low wages or no wages labor exploitations, looking at it more globally and not as specific to gender. But I think, I mean, definitely in this aqua aphrodisiac in the machine, obviously gets into gender issues because we're, you know, dealing with the oyster and this very suggestive object, and that's at the centerpiece of the project. And as I talk about it a little bit more on my website, that I see it more, especially within these new aquaculture industries, which are, you know, the whole coastline of China is filled with these highly sophisticated fish farming of aquaculture, bringing in, you know, billions of dollars. And it's just, you know, another form of capitalist extraction. And so by having this, it's almost like throwing a wrench in the machine of, well, let's, you know, get into biotechnology and geoengineering, but the output, the product, is going to be this very kind of sentient, you know, it's going to kind of shift the goals of capitalism and production and efficiency. It's kind of counter to that. So I look at it as somewhat of a queering of the biotechnology and geoengineering.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Lou Barron. Lou Barron, you are on camera. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I am so curious, Stephanie, about your Zoom background. It's really beautiful. I'm just wondering if you could explain some more about that.
Sure. So this is a fly mold, and slime molds are semi-intelligent organisms that a lot of artists have been working with. I would say probably more so in the past 5 to 7 years. I became really interested in them when I started looking, you know, sort of past the surface quality of plants and more into biology and different organisms. And so this is just a Petri dish. And I like that I was saying earlier before people came on, it kind of reminds me of the Addams family, and Morticia Addams used to sit in one of those wicker fan chairs. And it just is kind of like perfect, right? It looks like one of those chairs.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's what it is. And I have done some work with those, and they're fun and easy. You could just feed them oatmeal and they just kind of move around.
Cool. Thank you.
And then we have Grace Bonner. Go ahead.
Hi. My question was just kind of a general one about your work. I was wondering kind of where you get your inspiration for some of these installations, if you kind of go into it already thinking, okay, I have to create a piece based on a specific subject or just a piece in general and go from there, or if it's more fluid, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, that's I'm realizing that I really spend several years with the different pieces. So those robotic gardens, that was definitely several years. And it's a very erratic process where a lot of times there's certain political issues that are going on that I want to somehow talk about more artistically. And then of course there's theory being written about that. And I just feel there's certain forms or machines or technologies that can communicate it. And I have to just keep putting things together and showing it to people through different iterations until it makes sense. So yeah, it's a very kind of organic process. Sometimes it can take a really long time, like this aphrodisiac in the machine. There's a lot of other components to it, but it's taking a while, one, because of the pandemic, but and I don't have as good access to 3D printing and other fabricating, because I'm actually making all the shells and I'm making this aphrodisia lounge. So that 3D model of that crazy oyster, I'm trying to create that. I don't know if you can see. I don't know if you can see these. Here's like one shell on the architecture thing, but so I don't, yeah, it's kind of a back and forth. Sometimes there might be smaller things that I just get right away, and that's very exciting.
Okay, I have one more question that relates to this notion of iterations in your work, and maybe perhaps this notion of series, because your work does have some serial quality to it. So why? I guess that's the question.
Wait, what's the word?
The notion of iterations and series in your work.
Oh.
Yeah. Why is that?
Why is there
question? Yeah.
Because there's so much research, and I really like reading theory, that not one project, you know, like what happens in terms of the process is I start jamming everything into this one project, and people are like, I don't really know what this is about. This is way, way, way too complicated. And I'm like, oh, that's because there's probably 4 projects in there. Then you have to sort of pluck them out and you get a series. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the robotic gardens, that first one, the big map, took a really, really long time, but then the hanging planters was just like, boom, got that one. So I don't think, you know, I'm looking at the aphrodisiac in the machine as kind of the umbrella title, and there's the aquadisia water. There's probably going to be some more diagram maps that I have, like this whole thing about ecosystem services, and actually putting more of the human into the extraction of non-humans. So there will be different components to it.
Okay, and I think there's one more question related to that on the chat. Whether you could explain the difference between this kind of iterative work and traditional film, video, and arts.
Sure. That's actually one of the challenges for me, is I always kind of want to just make a film or a video, but it always tends to kind of come off the screen. I guess I really like the tactileness of objects, and I like devices and machines, and always wanting to create them. And I feel like they create very different experiences, but I think the experience, I feel like film and video kind of always has the ultimate immersive experience though. So it's been interesting during the pandemic, where that's what I kind of have to rely on. I've also started experimenting a little bit with Zoom performances and playing with the interactivity of Zoom. And you know, there's a lot of other interesting platforms where you can mix Zoom, and kind of getting a little bit into that as well. I don't know if that really answers the question.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I mean, at least when I look at your work, that there's this interest in kind of interrelating the so-called virtual and the physical, right? Because the idea that somehow that this was a very 90s idea, that these two things were completely, you know, different and split and so on. I don't think anybody now, at least my students, don't believe it when I tell them about locative games, and they're like, yeah, of course, you know. But yeah, it was a big thing. So I always think about that when I look at your work in that sense. That's just my thought. I think Phil Wild has a question or a comment. Phil, you want to come on camera?
Oh, there I go. I'm muted. Hi. You know, one of the things that I kept thinking about was, as you were talking about this sentient world, was Frank Herbert's book, The Jesus Incident, where he invented this world of Pandora with sentient kelp. And it was like, you know, my dream was to always be able to go out and drift among the sentient kelp. And I'm wondering how much sentience you really draw into this. It's like I really love this idea of being able to unify with other beings, and at the microbial level, that's incredible and a very nice part of your work. I'm very much into this idea of sentience, and I'm happy and wondering where you are coming from about the idea of sharing consciousness.
Well, there's one aspect of it that is kind of a critique of, and this kind of comes out of what a lot of people, you know, colleagues and friends, like when I've shown like this work in progress, they're like, this is, you know, the white neoliberal fantasy of transcendence. Like it goes back to the whole New Age movement, right? And probably based on my age, I can tap into that a bit. And I did live in Santa Fe, New Mexico for
I got it completely, absolutely.
So there's a part of me that really does believe in it. And then there's a part that, you know, is kind of the green capitalism, right, that comes
Right.
out of it. So I should also say that at Buffalo, Paul Venus, as some of you might know, the artist who did this great project about labor with the bacteria, he runs a bioarts laboratory. And so I'm supposed to be in there actually playing with oysters and their DNA and CRISPR and seeing what we can do, you know, with the deaspartic amino acid.
Right. And you know they're coming up with CRISPR kits for 12-year-olds. You know, that's one of my favorite things that's happening. But thank you. I love your work and it's really wonderful.
You.
But now you got me. I'm going to go back and read Ursula Le Guin again.
I'm going to go read the Jesus Incident.
Exactly. You should
Which
try.
one
Frank
are you going to
Herbert.
go back and read, Phil? Of Ursula Le Guin? I'm just curious.
Yeah, Earthsea. Earthsea. It was like
the series.
It's like,
yeah.
No, I mean, we lost her a couple of years ago, but boy, what
Yep.
an amazing feminist mind. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Phil. There's one other question about the relationship between arts and media and science. Did you ever have any reactions about that, bad or good? And were you ever interested in citizen science movements and tactics?
Yes, definitely. And that's actually where the slime mold comes in. I was collaborating with a friend of mine because I used to live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and somebody I met when I lived out there years ago. And she's kind of a jack of all trades and can do anything. And we were really interested in food insecurity. And one of the things that slime molds have been used for, urban planners have worked with slime molds because they were looking at their intelligence in terms of routing and distributing pathways, almost kind of an organic AI, right? They're kind of intelligent. So what they would do is they looked in Tokyo, congested areas, London, and they recreated these maps and they put slime mold, they put oatmeal in different destinations, like, you know, the suburbs or something. And they saw how the slime molds would, you know, you could see like in the behind me, like all the networking, all these distributed networks that they would create, and they could find more efficient routes of travel. I don't know if that makes sense. But so we, I think that citizen science is great. I love all of these DIY bio labs. When I was in Tokyo on a residency, I hung out at the Tokyo Bio Club, and their lab was, of course, it was in Tokyo, the size of a closet, but they could do, you know, so many different things. So I think that it's really critical and important. And I think it's super exciting to see how accessible it's become. CRISPR is a little scary, but it's also really fascinating. And I definitely want the 12-year-old science kit, because I buy all these. I have the way I learned about microbial fuel cells is I bought the kids, it's called a mud watt. And it's like super neato cool. You know, you have like a little Tupperware container and they made a little chip and you put mud in it. And then after a few days, the little LED lights up, or you could put a little digital clock on it. And I think all that stuff is great. I've tried making crystals. All that stuff is wonderful.
Did you hear this, Phil?
Yeah, you have to
Okay.
get a
Yeah. So we are being asked to wrap things up and move on to reflections. So perhaps something that you haven't shared yet. Would you like to share anything else that we haven't talked about, or any thoughts about the last year?
hard questions. The first
What
one,
a
the last one, are really hard. Reflections, things that I would want to share.
Something, or I can ask you one of the last questions from the New York Times, which is very,
Okay, let's see.
it stressed me out. It asks,
okay.
what do you want to achieve before things return to normal?
I want to learn Blender. I want to master Blender. No, that's not very exciting.
Okay, so your reflection is?
My reflection is, I just, you know, my reflection on, you know, just since, you know, the festival's really been looking at, you know, the past year and the whole infiltration and the Entangled Infiltration exhibition. I just, you know, as I think I mentioned in the other roundtable, just the strength of these online communities and these virtual events, and that the networking that can occur, and that it's really genuine. I think, you know, and I had mentioned that I have gotten to know a lot of people virtually that maybe I'd met in person only briefly, or just got to know them better virtually, but that it can happen and that it kind of keeps us all going. So
yeah, yes, I do agree. And I share your ambivalence, you know, because these networks, they have their downsides to them, but, you know, they were sure really handy, especially this time. So
yeah, I mean, we can't discount the Zoom fatigue and the problems of it, but without it, I mean, there would have been complete isolation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Stephanie. So we've been asked to turn on the cameras, everybody, and clap for Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing all of this. So, yay.
Bravo.
Well, thank you for such great questions and paying attention while I fumble through.
No, it was great. I want to try that water, and I'm sure Phil does too.
And we
So, so I was going to say we're going to have the offer